The sound of a zipper is usually just a mechanical noise. But when I heard it in that damp, trash-filled alley, while my 14-year-old daughter screamed my name, it wasn't just a sound. It was the moment my soul fractured. Dominic, the man laughing as he held a knife to her throat, thought he was the king of the concrete jungle. He didn't know he had just reactivated a decommissioned weapon of mass destruction. He thought he broke a father. Instead, he woke up a monster. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. Part 1. The Night the World Ended. I promised myself I would never be that guy again. For 12 years, I had successfully buried Hunter the Operator. I traded my suppressed 25 Malawian Kwacha's pistol for a framing hammer and a reliable pickup truck. I traded night raids in the Hindu Kush for parent-teacher conferences and fixing leaky faucets. I had become boring. I had become safe. And I convinced myself that safe was better than lethal. That lie cost me everything. It was a Tuesday night, unseasonably warm for October. My daughter, Violet, had just aced her chemistry final, and we were celebrating at a little Italian place downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it was our spot. Violet was laughing, stealing garlic knots from my plate, her braces flashing under the dim restaurant lights. She looked so much like her mother used to look, before the distance grew between us. Morgan, my wife, was there in body, but her mind was somewhere else. She kept glancing at her phone, flipping it face down on the checkered tablecloth every time it buzzed. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, wiping tomato sauce from my lip. Morgan flinched, her eyes wide. "What?" "Yeah, just work. The real estate market is crazy right now, Hunter. You know that." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a plastic smile. I should have pressed her. I should have trusted that gut instinct that kept me alive through 6 deployments. But I didn't. I just wanted a nice night. I wanted to be the oblivious husband. "Let's get the check," I said. "Violet has school tomorrow." We walked out into the cool air. The main parking garage was full, so we had parked 3 blocks over. To get there, we had to cut through an alley behind an old electronics store. It was a shortcut we had taken a dozen times. But the moment we stepped into the shadows, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was that electric hum, the feeling of being watched. The air felt heavy, displaced. "Wait," I said, putting a hand on Violet's shoulder. "Let's go back to the main street." "Dad, come on," Violet sighed, rolling her eyes. "It's freezing. The car is right there." "Hunter, stop being paranoid," Morgan snapped, her voice unusually shrill. "It's just an alley." Before I could argue, the shadows moved. They didn't just step out, they materialized. 6 of them. They wore hoodies and bandanas, but they moved with a confidence that told me this wasn't a robbery. This was an ambush. They blocked the exit behind us and the path forward. My heart rate slowed down. My vision tunneled. The operator was knocking on the door of my mind, asking to be let in. But I was rusty, and I was holding a takeout bag, not a weapon. "Wallet and phones," I said calmly, stepping in front of Violet and Morgan. "Take them and go." A man stepped forward from the group. He was huge, heavily tattooed, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. This was Dominic. I didn't know his name then, but I would learn it soon enough. He didn't look at the wallet I held out. He looked at Violet. "We don't want your cash, Carpenter," Dominic said, his voice like gravel in a blender. "We're here to collect a tax." "Hunter," Morgan whispered. Her voice wasn't scared. It was guilty? "No," I told myself. "She's just terrified." "Run," I hissed to them. I lunged. I hit the first guy in the throat, collapsing his windpipe. I spun and shattered the knee of the second. For 2 seconds, I was winning. I was the storm. But I was 42, not 25. And I was protecting 2 civilians. A lead pipe swung from the darkness and connected with the back of my skull. The world exploded into white light. My knees hit the wet pavement. Before I could recover, 3 of them were on me. Boots kicked my ribs, my face, my stomach. I curled up, trying to protect my vitals, waiting for the opening to counterattack. But then I heard the scream. "Daddy!" Help! I roared, throwing a man off my back, but another one slammed my head into a brick wall. My vision swam. When I cleared my eyes, they had me pinned, arms zip-tied, face pressed against the gritty asphalt. Dominic had Violet. He had her pinned against a dumpster. She was crying, begging, looking at me with eyes that shouted, "Save me, Dad. You always save me. Look at me." Dominic yelled at me. He grabbed Violet's hair. "You watch, old man. You watch what happens when you don't pay your dues." "I don't know who you are," I screamed, spitting blood. "Let her go. Take me." Dominic just laughed. It was a hollow, soulless sound. He looked over at Morgan. My wife wasn't being held. She was standing in the corner, shaking, her hands over her mouth. Why weren't they touching her? Why was she just standing there? Then came the sound. The zipper. The next 10 minutes lasted 10 years. I fought against the zip ties until my wrists were shredded meat. I screamed until my vocal cords bled. I broke one of my fingers trying to snap the plastic. But I couldn't move. I had to watch. I had to watch my innocent, brilliant daughter be destroyed by a savage animal while I, a man trained by the United States Navy to kill enemies of the state, lay helpless in the dirt. When Dominic was finished, he zipped his pants up and spat on me. "Tell your wife to answer her phone next time," he whispered in my ear. Then they vanished. Like smoke. The silence that followed was louder than the screaming. Violet lay curled in a ball on the dirty ground, not moving. Morgan was sobbing now, hysterical, trying to cover Violet with her coat. I couldn't feel my legs. I crawled over to them, dragging my body across the broken glass. "Violet," I croaked. "Baby girl, I'm here." She flinched away from my touch. She looked at me, her eyes hollow, the light gone. She didn't see her father anymore. She saw a man who had failed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights began to bounce off the brick walls of the alley. The cavalry had arrived. 10 minutes too late. I sat there, holding my weeping daughter, looking at my wife who couldn't meet my gaze. The physical pain from the beating was throbbing in my skull, but it was nothing compared to the cold, black rage expanding in my chest. The police officers rushed in, guns drawn, shouting commands. They asked questions. They called for medics. They put a blanket around me. I didn't speak. I stared at the spot where Dominic had stood. I memorized the tread pattern of his boots in the mud. I replayed the sound of his voice. I visualized the tattoo on his neck, a serpent eating its own tail. "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" a young officer asked, shining a light in my eyes. "We need to get you to the hospital." I looked up at him. The carpenter was gone. The suburban dad was dead in that alley. "I don't need a hospital," I said, my voice so low the officer had to lean in. "Sir, you have a severe head laceration." I stood up. I shouldn't have been able to stand, but the adrenaline was pumping pure, cold fuel into my veins. I looked at Morgan. She was typing on her phone again. Even now, something wasn't right. The tax, the way Dominic looked at her, the way they left her untouched. The pieces of the puzzle were jagged and sharp, but they were starting to fit together. And the picture they were forming was more horrific than the assault itself. I walked over to the ambulance where they were loading Violet. I took her hand. She squeezed it weakly. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." But apologies were useless now. Apologies were for spilled milk. This required something else. This required a balancing of the scales. As the ambulance doors closed, I looked back at the alley. The police were putting up yellow tape. They were going to follow procedure. They were going to file reports. They were going to look for fingerprints that weren't there. They were going to fail. I knew it in my bones. Men like Dominic didn't fear the police. They owned the police, or they outsmarted them. But Dominic had made a fatal calculation error. He thought he had attacked a family of sheep. He didn't check the file. He didn't know that the graying man in the flannel shirt used to be the ghost that cartels told their children about to make them behave. I wiped the blood from my eyes. I didn't feel pain anymore. I felt clarity. I wasn't going to call a lawyer. I wasn't going to wait for a detective. I was going home to the basement. I had a wall to break down. And behind that wall was a black crate that hadn't seen the light of day in 15 years. The hospital waiting room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. It was a smell I associated with combat support hospitals and active war zones, places where men went to die or lose limbs. Now, it was where I sat while doctors examined my teenage daughter for evidence of a crime that never should have happened. Morgan was pacing near the vending machines. She hadn't sat down once. Every few minutes, she'd walk to the window, look out at the dark parking lot, and then check her phone. The screen's glow illuminated her face, pale, sweaty, twitchy. "Who are you texting, Morgan?" I asked. My voice was raspy, my throat swollen from the clothesline tackle in the alley. She jumped, nearly dropping the device. "My mother, Hunter. I'm telling her what happened. She needs to know. At 3 a.m.? She's awake. You know she has insomnia." I didn't press it. I didn't have the energy to fight her yet. My mind was too busy processing the conversation I'd just had with Detective Miller. Miller was a tired-looking man with coffee stains on his tie and eyes that said he'd seen too much bad and done too little good. He had come out of Violet's room 20 minutes ago, hat in hand. "Mr. Hunter," he'd said, pulling me aside. "We picked up a suspect matching your description. A guy named Dominic Vance. Street name Dominote." "Good," I'd said, feeling a surge of hope. "I want 5 minutes with him." Miller shook his head. "We had to cut him loose." The air left the room. "Excuse me." "Procedural error during the pickup," Miller mumbled, looking at his shoes. "Officer didn't read him his rights properly before he started talking. And, well, your wife's statement was inconsistent." "Inconsistent how?" I demanded, stepping into his personal space. "She said it was too dark. She said she couldn't be sure it was him. Without a positive ID from a witness who isn't the victim, since Violet is a minor and traumatized, the DA won't touch it. Vance walked out the back door 10 minutes ago. The system, the glorious American justice system. It protected the wolves and caged the sheep." I looked at Morgan across the waiting room. She couldn't ID him? The man had a snake tattoo on his neck. He stood 3 feet from her. Why would she lie? Unless she was afraid. Or unless she knew him. The doctor came out then. "She's resting. Physically, she will heal. There's tearing, bruising. But the psychological trauma, that's going to be the long road." I nodded. I walked into the room. Violet looked tiny in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. Her face was swollen on one side. She was asleep, but even in sleep, she flinched. I kissed her forehead. It was cold. "I promise you," I whispered to the beeping machines. "I will burn the world down to fix this." We took her home the next morning. The house felt different. It felt like a fortress that had been breached. Violet went straight to her room and locked the door. She didn't want to talk. She didn't want to eat. Morgan immediately poured herself a glass of wine. At 10 a.m., "I'm going to go lay down," she said, avoiding my eyes. "I can't deal with this right now, Hunter. It's too much." "Go ahead," I said. As soon as her bedroom door clicked shut, I went to work. But not on the house. I went down to the basement. It was my workshop. Saws, drills, lumber. The smell of sawdust usually calmed me. Today, it smelled like weakness. I walked to the back wall, behind the stacked sheets of plywood. I grabbed a crowbar. There was a section of drywall I had installed 12 years ago, right after I retired. I knew exactly where the studs were. Crack. The drywall crumbled. I ripped it away in chunks, revealing the concrete foundation behind it. But there was a hollow space, a small alcove I had framed out and hidden. Sitting there, covered in a layer of gray dust, was a black pelican case. Waterproof. Crushproof. I dragged it out. It was heavy. I set it on my workbench, sweeping aside the blueprints for a gazebo I was supposed to build next week. I popped the latches. Click, click, click. The lid hissed as the air pressure equalized. Inside, resting in custom-cut foam, was my past. My SIG Sauer P226 Navy. A suppressor. A K-bar combat knife with a worn leather handle. A spool of tripwire. Night vision goggles. The good ones, panoramic quad tubes I had acquired before leaving the teams, and a black hard drive containing encryption keys and software that was technically illegal for a civilian to possess. I picked up the knife. It felt balanced. It felt familiar. My hand stopped shaking for the first time in 24 hours. I wasn't Hunter the Carpenter anymore. I was Chief Petty Officer Hunter, call sign Wraith. I took the hard drive upstairs to my office. I had a secure laptop I kept offline for emergencies. I booted it up and plugged in the drive. The first thing I needed was intel. Detective Miller said the guy's name was Dominic Vance. I didn't use Google. I used a backdoor into the state police database, a little gift from a friend in naval intelligence who owed me his life. I typed in the name. Dominic Vance, aka Domino. Affiliation, the Vipers. Status, active. His rap sheet was a mile long. Assault, racketeering, drug distribution. But he always walked. Charges dropped. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence lost. He wasn't just a gangbanger. He was protected. I scrolled down to his associates. And that's when my blood ran cold. There were photos of his crew. I recognized the guys from the alley. But there was a section for known associates, financial/legal. One of the names flagged was a lawyer named Julian Thorne. I clicked on Julian's photo. Clean cut, expensive suit, winning smile. The file said he was a consultant for urban development. I knew that face. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out Morgan's old iPad. She never used it anymore, but it was still synced to her cloud account. I guessed her passcode, Violet's birthday. It unlocked. I went to her photos. I scrolled back 3 months. There was a picture of Morgan at a charity gala. She was wearing a red dress I had bought her. And standing next to her, with his hand resting a little too comfortably on her waist, was Julian Thorne. The caption read, "Great night with the new gym trainer." So motivating. Gym trainer? The man was a mob lawyer. My stomach churned. The inconsistent statement. The phone calls. The terror that wasn't quite terror. Morgan wasn't just a victim in that alley. She knew these people. I looked back at the screen, at Dominic's smug mugshot. Then at Julian's smiling face. Then at the photo of my wife. The betrayal wasn't random. It was a web. And my daughter was the fly they had caught in the middle. I closed the laptop. I went back to the basement and started cleaning the P226. The smell of gun oil filled the room. It was the scent of judgment. The police had failed. The law had failed. Now it was my turn. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep is a luxury for the innocent, and I had work to do. While Morgan was passed out from the wine and Violet was fighting nightmares in her room, I was in the garage, prepping my vehicle. My truck was a standard Ford F-150, but I needed it to be invisible. I swapped the plates for a set I'd stolen from a junked sedan 2 towns over. I disabled the GPS tracker and the interior lights. If I was going to hunt, I had to be a ghost. My target was the Vipers. Dominic Vance was the head of the snake. But you don't grab a snake by the head unless you want to get bitten. You watch it first. You learn how it moves. According to the police file I hacked, Dominic ran his operations out of a nightclub called the Velvet Room in the gritty part of the city. It was a classic front. Loud music, cheap drinks, and a VIP section where the real business happened. I parked 3 blocks away at 9 p.m. I wasn't wearing my tactical gear yet. That would draw attention. I was dressed in dark, nondescript clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. I looked like every other blue-collar guy looking for a drink after a shift. I didn't go inside. I found a fire escape on an abandoned building across the street. I climbed to the roof, set up my spotter scope, and waited. Patience is the primary weapon of a sniper. Most people can't sit still for 10 minutes. I once lay in a rice paddy for 3 days waiting for a target. 3 hours on a rooftop was a vacation. Through the scope, the world turned green. I watched the bouncers checking IDs. I watched the dealers working the corners, exchanging small packets for cash. It was sloppy. These guys had no discipline. They were loud, arrogant, flashing their guns. At 11:15 p.m., a black SUV rolled up to the curb. The bouncers straightened up. The crowd parted. Dominic stepped out. Seeing him again, free and laughing, made my finger twitch. I could have ended him right there. A single shot from a suppressed rifle would drop him before his bodyguards knew he was dead. But that was too easy. Death was too quick for what he did to Violet. I needed to destroy his life before I took it. He walked inside like he owned the city. I kept watching. I needed to see who came to visit the king. 30 minutes later, a silver Audi pulled up. The man who stepped out wasn't a gangster. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Julian, the gym trainer, the mob lawyer. He looked nervous. He checked his watch, looked left and right, then hurried past the bouncers who nodded him through without a search. I zoomed in on his face. He looked sweaty. Why would a lawyer be sweating going into a meeting with his own clients? Unless he wasn't in charge. Unless he was in trouble. I needed to hear what was being said in that VIP room. I packed up my scope and climbed down. I moved to the back of the club. There was a service entrance for deliveries. 2 Vipers were smoking by the dumpsters, their backs to the alley, laughing about some girl. "Did you see the way she screamed?" one of them said. My blood boiled. I knew who they were talking about. I moved. I didn't kill them. Dead bodies bring police. I needed them to stay asleep. I slipped out of the shadows. A quick strike to the carotid artery of the first guy. He dropped silently. The second guy turned, eyes wide, but my hand was already over his mouth. I drove my knee into his solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him, then applied a sleeper hold. 10 seconds. 2 unconscious guards. I dragged them behind the dumpster and took the key card from the first guy's belt. Inside, the bass from the music thumped against my chest. I stuck to the shadows, moving through the kitchen, avoiding the staff. I found the ventilation shaft access in the dry storage room. It was tight, greasy, and hot, but it led straight over the VIP office. I crawled until I was directly above a vent. I could see down into the room. Dominic was sitting on a leather couch, feet on the table. Julian was standing, pacing back and forth. "I need more time, Dom," Julian was saying. His voice was shaking. "She doesn't have the liquidity yet. Her husband controls the main accounts." My breath caught in my throat. Her husband. "I don't care about the carpenter," Dominic spat, taking a sip of whiskey. "We sent the message. We roughed up the kid. That was the warning. If Morgan doesn't pay the 50 grand by Friday, we don't hurt the kid next time. We take the kid." I froze. The world tilted on its axis. "Roughed up." Julian looked sick. "Dom, you said you were just going to scare them. You raped her daughter. That wasn't the deal." Dominic laughed. He stood up and slapped Julian hard across the face. "The deal is what I say it is. Your little girlfriend racked up the debt at my tables. She wanted to play the high roller. She pays the price. You vouched for her, Julian. So if she doesn't pay, I take it out of your hide." I had heard enough. I wasn't just hunting a gang anymore. I was hunting a conspiracy. My wife, Morgan, wasn't a victim. She was a gambler. She owed these animals money. And because she couldn't pay, she had served our daughter up on a silver platter. The gym trainer was her lover and her bookie. I backed out of the vent. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of the last year. The late nights at work. The missing savings I thought were market losses. The way she stood in the alley, untouched. They knew who she was. I made it back to my truck without being seen. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I had gone there to find a target. I found the truth instead. I drove home in silence. The house was dark when I pulled in. I walked upstairs. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom. Morgan was sleeping, her breathing soft and rhythmic. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. I looked at her hands resting on the pillow, the hands that had held our daughter as a baby, the hands that had signed the gambling markers. I wanted to wake her up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag her out of bed and throw her into the street. But that was the old Hunter, the emotional Hunter. The operator took over. Objective updated, neutralized the threat. Morgan was no longer my wife. She was an enemy asset inside the wire. And you don't scream at enemy assets. You exploit them. I turned around and walked out of the bedroom. I went to Violet's room. I cracked the door open just an inch to check on her. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. "Dad?" she whispered. I stepped in. "Yeah, honey. It's me. I can't sleep," she said. "I keep seeing his face." I sat on the edge of her bed. I didn't hug her. I didn't offer empty platitudes. "Violet," I said, my voice steady. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She looked at me, confusion in her eyes. "Yeah. Things are going to get weird around here. I'm going to handle this. But I need you to be strong. Stronger than you've ever been." "Are you going to catch them?" she asked. "I'm not going to catch them," I said. "I'm going to erase them." I left her room and went back to the basement. I sat at my computer. Dominic wanted 50 grand by Friday. I was going to give him something much, much worse. I didn't need any more proof, but I wanted it. I needed the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of the woman I once called my wife. The next morning, I waited. I heard the shower start in our master bathroom. Morgan always took long, hot showers, as if she were trying to wash away her sins. It gave me the window I needed. I slipped into our bedroom. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging. She'd changed the passcode after the incident, but she was predictable. She swapped Violet's birthday for her own. Amateur. I plugged a small, black device into the phone's charging port. It was a data cloner, something we used in the field to pull intel from a target's electronics in seconds. Within a minute, I had a complete copy of her phone's contents: texts, calls, location history, even deleted files. I retreated to my basement office and plugged the cloner into my secure laptop. The files unpacked, and I started with her messages. I didn't have to search long. The thread with Julian Thorne was right at the top. The last 6 months of my life scrolled before my eyes in a timeline of deceit. "Morgan, I lost again. Julian. I'm down another 10. Julian. Morgan, you have to stop. Dom is not a patient man. Morgan, can you cover me? Just this once. Hunter is getting suspicious about the savings account. Julian, I can't. I'm already in deep for vouching for you. You need to come up with the money." My hands were steady, my breathing even. I felt nothing. It was like reading an after-action report on a mission that had gone bad. The emotion was gone. Only the facts remained. Then I found the messages from the day before the attack. "Julian, he's getting angry, Morgan. He wants his 50,000 by the end of the week. He said he's going to come collect it. Morgan, I can't get it. Hunter will know. Can't you talk to him? Tell him to back off. Julian, there is one way. We stage a robbery. He gets some of what he's owed. You look like a victim, and Hunter doesn't suspect a thing. Dom's guys will just scare him a little. Take your jewelry. It'll buy you time." And then, the final, soul-crushing message. From my wife. "Morgan, okay, do it. We're going to Giovanni's for dinner tomorrow night. We usually park a few blocks over." She gave him the location. She gave him the time. She set the trap. She led her own husband and daughter into an ambush to cover her gambling debts and her affair. The information I'd overheard in the vent was devastating. This was worse. This was a signed confession. I closed the laptop. I didn't smash it. I didn't put my fist through the wall. That cold, clean rage from the alley had hardened into something else. It was no longer rage. It was purpose. The woman upstairs was not my wife. She was a hostile combatant who had compromised the safety of my most valuable asset, our daughter, and I was going to treat her as such. Destroying Dominic and his crew was still the primary mission. But the mission had a new secondary objective. Morgan wouldn't just be exposed. She would be used. She would become a tool in the very destruction she had helped set in motion. I walked back upstairs. The smell of coffee was in the air. Morgan was in the kitchen, dressed for the day, acting the part of the grieving wife. "Hey," she said softly, not quite meeting my eyes. "Did you sleep?" I stopped and looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the cheap mask she was wearing, the fake fear, the selfish guilt. "No," I said, my voice flat and empty. "I was busy, but I think I figured something out." She tensed, clutching her coffee mug. "What?" Did the police call? No, I said, taking a step closer. I leaned against the counter, right next to her. I could smell her perfume. The same perfume she wore to the charity gala with Julian. I know who's responsible for what happened, I said quietly. Her face went pale. She thought I meant Dominic. She thought the system was working. The relief in her eyes was sickening. Really, she stammered. They have him. Not them, I said, looking straight into her soul. Me. I held her gaze for a long second, letting her wonder what I meant. Letting the fear, the real fear, begin to crawl up her spine. Then I turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her secrets and her rapidly dawning horror. War is not just about bullets. The most effective weapon in a SEAL's arsenal is fear. Before you pull the trigger, you break the enemy's mind. You make them see shadows where there are none. You make them question their sanity. It was time to take the Vipers to school. Friday was the deadline Dominic had set for Morgan's $50,000. But I wasn't going to let them get comfortable waiting for payday. I wanted them erratic. I wanted them paranoid. I started with the low-level soldiers, the muscle I'd identified from the alley and the club. These guys were superstitious, loud, and careless. Tuesday night, I tracked one of Dominic's top enforcers, a guy named Tank. He lived in a rundown apartment complex on the edge of their territory. I knew from my surveillance that Tank kept his prized possession, a custom, gold-plated Desert Eagle pistol, on his nightstand while he slept. Getting in was child's play. A tension wrench on the back door lock, 30 seconds of stealth movement past his snoring girlfriend on the couch. I stood over him while he slept. I could have slit his throat right there. Instead, I picked up the gold pistol. I emptied the magazine, pocketed the bullets, and placed a single photo on the nightstand next to the gun. It was a picture of Tank's own mother, taken that afternoon while she was grocery shopping. I had printed it off earlier. On the back, I wrote one word in red marker, smile. I left without a sound. The next morning, I was parked 2 blocks away, listening to a police scanner I had modified to pick up their encrypted radio channels. Dom, you gotta listen to me. Tank's voice was cracking over the frequency. Someone was in my room, man. They touched my piece. They got a picture of my ma. Shut up, you idiot. Dominic's voice came back, distorted but angry. You're high. Nobody gets into your place. I ain't high. It was a ghost, man. I'm telling you. Panic. It's infectious. Wednesday night, I went bigger. I knew where the Vipers stashed their street cash, a safe house disguised as a legitimate auto repair shop. They didn't keep guards inside at night because they relied on a high-end alarm system. I bypassed the alarm panel in 4 minutes. I didn't steal the money. Thieves steal money. I wasn't a thief. I opened the safe. There was about 80 grand in cash bundles. I took every single stack and ran them through a paper shredder I'd brought with me. I left the pile of shredded currency in the middle of the floor in a neat pyramid. On top of the pile, I left a single, pristine 9mm bullet. The next day, the chatter on the radio wasn't panicked. It was vicious. Dominic was screaming. He was accusing his own lieutenants of skimming, of setting him up. The crew was fracturing. They didn't know who to trust. Was it a rival gang? Was it the cops? Or was it someone inside? By Thursday, the atmosphere around the Velvet Room was toxic. I watched from my rooftop perch as fights broke out between Dominic's men. But I wasn't done. I had one more message to deliver before the deadline. I found the smallest, weakest link in their chain, a kid named Rat, the getaway driver from the alley. I caught him leaving a convenience store at 2 a.m. I didn't hurt him. I didn't even speak. I just grabbed him, zipped him up, and threw him in the back of my truck. I drove him to an empty lot miles outside the city. When I pulled him out, he was crying, begging for his life. I wore a ski mask. I stood over him, silent as a grave. I handed him a phone. Dial, I said. It was the only word I spoke. He shook so hard, he dropped the phone twice. Finally, he dialed Dominic. Put it on speaker. Dominic answered on the second ring. Who is this? I leaned into the phone. I didn't shout. I used a voice I hadn't used since Afghanistan, Low, flat, devoid of humanity. The debt is canceled, I said. Who the hell is this? Dominic roared. You think you can mess with my money? I'll find you. I'll kill your whole family. You already tried, I said. Now, I'm going to kill yours. Not your family, Dominic. Your family. Your brothers. Your business. Your life. One by one. I hung up. I looked down at Rat. Run. He ran into the darkness like the devil himself was chasing him. He would run straight to Dominic. He would tell him about the man in the mask. The man who wasn't afraid. I drove back to the city as the sun began to rise. The psychological groundwork was laid. The enemy was confused, angry, and turning on itself. They were looking for shadows in every corner. They were ready for the next phase. Now, it was time to isolate the real target. The man who held the leash to my wife. Julian. Julian Thorne was a man who liked order. His suits were tailored, his car was detailed weekly, and his life was compartmentalized into neat little boxes: legitimate lawyer, gang consultant, and manipulative lover. He thought those boxes were separate. I was about to kick them all over. It was Friday evening, the deadline for the $50,000. Julian was working late at his law office downtown, likely waiting for Morgan to call in a panic or for Dominic to call with threats. He left the building at 8:45 p.m., walking briskly to the underground parking garage. I was already inside his Audi. I had bypassed the electronic lock 5 minutes earlier and was waiting in the back seat, pressed low into the shadows of the floorboards. The windows were tinted dark, perfect for privacy, perfect for an ambush. He got in, tossed his briefcase onto the passenger seat, and sighed deeply. He started the car, the engine purring to life. As he reached for the seatbelt, I sat up. I didn't use a gun. A gun is impersonal. I wrapped a length of piano wire around the headrest and pulled it taut, just inches from his throat. Drive, I said. Julian gasped, his hands flying to his neck, but he froze when he felt the wire grazing his skin. Take the car. Take whatever you want. I said drive. Level 4. The empty section. He obeyed, his hands shaking so violently the car swerved as he climbed the ramp. When we reached the deserted top level, I told him to kill the engine. Who are you? He whimpered, staring into the rearview mirror. He couldn't see my face, just the dark outline of a nightmare in his back seat. I'm the husband, I said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush him. He stopped breathing for a second. Hunter, he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. Hunter. Look, man, you don't understand. I tried to stop them. I swear. Shut up. I tightened the wires slightly. Not enough to cut, just enough to let him know I could take his head off with a flick of my wrists. Here is what is going to happen, Julian. You are going to pick up your phone. You are going to call Dominic. He'll kill me, Julian sobbed. If he thinks I'm working with you, he's going to kill you anyway, I said calmly. He thinks you set him up. He thinks you and Morgan are planning to run off with the money he's owed. That's the story I've been planting in his head all week. What? The shredded money? The intel leaks? I made it look like an inside job. And you're the only one with the access, Julian. He realized then that he was already dead. The game he had been playing was over. He wasn't the player anymore. He was the pawn. Call him, I ordered. Tell him you have the money from Morgan. Tell him she paid up. But tell him you're bringing it to the old shipyard tonight. Alone. Why? Because I want him out in the open. And if you don't make that call, I will peel your face off right here in this nice German car. He dialed. He put it on speaker. Dom. Julian's voice was a high-pitched squeak. Where is my money, lawyer? Dominic barked. He sounded exhausted, paranoid. I have it. She paid. All of it. Good. Dominic grunted. Bring it to the club. No. Julian glanced at the rearview mirror, terrified. Too much heat at the club, Dom. The cops are swarming the place. Meet me at the shipyard. Warehouse 4. Midnight. There was a long pause. The shipyard? Why there? It's safe, Dom. Just you and me. I don't want any of your guys knowing I'm carrying this much cash. They're already turning on each other. Another pause. Then Dominic laughed. A cold, ugly sound. Fine. Midnight. But Julian? If you're messing with me. I'm not dumb. I swear. The line went dead. I released the wire. Julian slumped forward against the steering wheel, gasping for air, clutching his throat. Thank you, I said. Before he could turn around, I injected a sedative into his neck. It was a calculated dose, enough to keep him out for 6 hours, but not enough to kill him. He slumped over, unconscious. I got out of the car. I took his phone. I took his keys. I opened the trunk and shoved him inside. I wasn't going to kill Julian. Not yet. He was my bait. I needed Dominic at the shipyard, but I also needed a scapegoat if things went sideways. I drove his Audi out of the garage. I felt a strange sense of calm. The pieces were moving exactly as I had predicted. The chaotic variables, Dominic's ego, Julian's cowardice, Morgan's greed, were all constants I could manipulate. I pulled over a few blocks away and switched to my truck. I needed to get home for one last performance. When I walked through the front door, it was 9:30 p.m. Morgan was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice tight. "Just driving," I said, walking past her to the kitchen. Clearing my head, I grabbed a bottle of water, then turned to her. I let my face soften. I let the operator mask slip just enough to show the husband she thought she could fool. "Morgan," I said, "I know we've been distant, but I want you to know, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make sure nobody ever hurts us again." She looked at me, confusion warring with guilt in her eyes. "Hunter, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about justice," I said. "I'm going out again tonight." "Don't wait up." "Where are you going?" Panic spiked in her voice. "Hunter, please, just stay here. It's dangerous." "I have to go meet an old friend," I lied. "Someone who might be able to help with our financial situation." I saw the color drain from her face. She thought I knew about the debt. She thought I was going to pay it. "Hunter, no. It's okay, honey," I said, kissing her on the cheek. It felt like kissing a corpse. "Trust me." I walked out the door, leaving her in a hell of her own making. She would be texting Julian frantically right now. But Julian wouldn't answer. Julian was in the trunk of a car at the shipyard. And soon, Dominic would be there too. The trap was set. The stage was dressed. It was time for the final act. The shipyard was a graveyard of industry. Rusted cranes loomed like skeletal fingers against the moonlight, and the air smelled of salt, rot, and oil. It was the perfect place for a ghost story. And tonight, I was the ghost. I arrived at 10:30 p.m., giving myself 90 minutes to prepare the battle space. In the teams, we had a saying: if you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck. I had no intention of fighting fair. I parked my truck a mile away in a dense patch of reeds and hiked in. I was fully kitted out now. No more flannel shirts. I wore black tactical pants, a lightweight plate carrier, and my night vision goggles were mounted on my helmet, though I kept them flipped up for now. My suppressed P226 was on my hip, and a compact MP7 submachine gun was slung across my chest. But my primary weapons tonight weren't firearms. They were shadows and sound. I entered Warehouse 4. It was a cavernous space, filled with old shipping containers stacked in a maze-like grid. I moved quickly, placing remote detonated flashbangs at key choke points. I set up a high-lumen strobe light in the rafters, aimed at the center of the floor. Then, I went to Julian's car. I had driven it here earlier and parked it right in the center of the warehouse, under a single, flickering halogen light. I popped the trunk. Julian was groggy, blinking in the harsh light. "Get out," I whispered. He tumbled onto the concrete, his legs weak. Where am I?" "End of the line, Julian." I dragged him to a steel pillar in the center of the open space and zip-tied his hands behind it. He was now the centerpiece of my display. "Hunter, please," he wept. "Don't leave me here. Dominic will kill me." "That's the plan," I said, checking the sight on my MP7. "You see, Julian, to catch a predator, you need a bleeding goat. You're the goat. I'll tell him everything. I'll tell him it was you. Go ahead, I said, stepping back into the darkness. He won't believe you. He thinks you're the one who shredded his money. He thinks you're the one who sent the photos. You're a traitor in his eyes. And traitors don't get to talk. I vanished into the shadows of the container stacks. I climbed up to the top level, lying prone on a rusted catwalk 30 feet above the floor. From here, I could see everything. I checked my watch. 11:55 p.m. The sound of engines cut through the silence outside. Not one car. 3. Dominic didn't come alone. Of course not. He brought an army. I watched through my thermal optics as 12 heat signatures moved toward the warehouse entrance. They were fanned out, weapons drawn. AK-47s, shotguns, pistols. They were expecting a trap, but they were looking for a rival gang, not a single man. Clear, one of them shouted. Dominic walked in last. He looked terrible. His eyes were sunken, his movements twitchy. The psychological warfare had worked. He was fraying at the edges. He saw Julian tied to the pillar. Well, Dominic sneered, his voice echoing in the vast metal chamber. Look at the little lawyer. He signaled his men. They spread out, checking the corners, but they didn't look up. Nobody ever looks up. Dominic walked up to Julian and pistol-whipped him across the face. Julian screamed. Where is it? Dominic yelled. Where's the money? I don't have it. Julian sobbed, blood running down his chin. It was Hunter, the husband. He's here. He's watching us. Dominic laughed. The husband? The carpenter? You expect me to believe a guy who builds birdhouses took down my crew? You're lying to me, Julian. You kept the money for yourself. No. Dominic, look around. He's crazy. He's a SEAL or something. Dominic stopped. He looked around the empty warehouse. A SEAL? You're hallucinating. He raised his gun to Julian's head. Goodbye, lawyer. Click. I triggered the first distraction. A localized charge blew out the main fuse box on the far wall. Sparks showered down like fireworks, and the single halogen light above them died. The warehouse plunged into pitch blackness. What the hell? Dominic screamed. Flashlights. Flashlights now. Beams of light cut through the dark, swinging wildly. Crack. I fired a single shot. Not at a person. At a metal drum near the entrance. The sound of the bullet striking steel was deafening in the enclosed space. Over there, a thug yelled, opening fire blindly at the drum. The muzzle flashes lit up the room in strobe-like bursts. I moved. I ran along the catwalk, silent as a whisper. I dropped down onto a stack of containers behind their line. I was behind them now. I grabbed the rearmost guard. Before he could scream, my knife severed his vocal cords. I lowered him silently to the ground. 1 down. 11 to go. Hold fire. Dominic roared. Who's there? Show yourself. I activated the strobe light in the rafters. It began to pulse rapidly, a disorienting, blinding white light that made it impossible for them to focus. I'm right here, I said. My voice didn't come from where I was standing. I had placed a Bluetooth speaker inside an empty container on the other side of the room. They all turned toward the voice, raising their weapons. Kill him, Dominic screamed. They unleashed a wall of lead into the empty container. The sound was thunderous. While they were distracted, I dropped to the floor level. I moved like water through the chaos. 2 shots. Thwip thwip. Another guard dropped with 2 holes in his chest. I moved again. They were shooting at shadows. They were screaming orders that made no sense. They were terrified. I wasn't fighting a gang anymore. I was harvesting souls. Dominic was backing away, grabbing Julian by the collar, trying to use him as a shield against a ghost he couldn't see. Come out and fight me like a man. Dominic shrieked, his voice cracking. I paused in the darkness, checking my ammo. I'm not a man, Dominic. I whispered to myself. I'm the consequence. I triggered the second flashbang right at their feet. Boom. The white light blinded them. The concussive blast knocked 3 of them off their feet. It was time to close the distance. The flashbang bought me 4 seconds of total dominance. In a gunfight, 4 seconds is a lifetime. I surged forward from the shadows. The thermal vision on my goggles turned the confused, blinded gang members into glowing white targets against a blue background. They were stumbling, rubbing their eyes, their ears ringing from the blast. I moved with the efficiency of a machine. Double tap to the chest of the nearest gunman. He folded. Pivot left. A thug was raising a shotgun. I caught the barrel, redirected it upward as he pulled the trigger. The blast took out a chunk of the ceiling and drove my knife into his kidney. He dropped without a sound. Third target. He was on his knees, swinging a pistol wildly. I kicked his wrist, hearing the bone snap, and delivered a silenced round to his temple before he hit the ground. 3 down in 3 seconds. The strobe light I had rigged above was still pulsing, turning the warehouse into a flickering nightmare. Back to back, Dominic screamed. He had dragged Julian behind a stack of crates and was cowering there, his gun pointed at the empty air. Shoot anything that moves. The remaining 6 gunmen formed a ragged circle, their backs to the center. That was smart, but they were looking out at eye level. I wasn't at eye level. I had already scrambled up the side of a shipping container. I was 10 feet above them. I pulled a pin on a smoke grenade and dropped it right into the center of their circle. Hiss. Thick, gray smoke billowed out instantly, choking them, blinding them further. The circle broke as they coughed and scattered, trying to escape the cloud. Chaos. My old friend. I dropped down into the smoke. I didn't need to see. I had the layout memorized, and I could hear their panicked breathing. I grabbed a man by his vest and pulled him into the darkness. A quick strike to the throat, and he was gone. Another one started firing blindly into the smoke. He's everywhere. He's everywhere. Friendly fire is a terrible thing. His wild shots clipped one of his own friends in the leg. The friend screamed and returned fire. Stop shooting, you idiots. Dominic yelled from his cover. I watched them tear each other apart for a moment. It was almost too easy. These men were bullies, used to intimidating shopkeepers and teenagers. They had no discipline. They had no brotherhood. I decided to thin the herd. I moved along the perimeter of the smoke. Thwip. Thwip. Another guard down. Thwip. Another. Within 2 minutes, only Dominic and 2 bodyguards were left standing. And Julian, who was curled up in a fetal position, sobbing. Dominic realized the tide had turned. Retreat, he screamed. Get to the car. He abandoned Julian. He abandoned his men. He ran for the exit, his 2 bodyguards flanking him. I let them go. I didn't want to end it here. Not yet. The warehouse was just the slaughterhouse for his pawns. Dominic deserved a more personal venue for his judgment. I walked over to Julian. The smoke was clearing. He looked up at me, his face a mask of terror and snot. You, he wheezed. You killed them all. I knelt down and cut his zip ties. Get up, I said. He scrambled back, crab walking away from me. Are you going to kill me? No, I said. I need a messenger. I pulled a burner phone from my pocket and tossed it to him. Call the police, I said. Tell them there was a gang war. Tell them Dominic Vance killed everyone here and fled the scene. Tell them you were a hostage. Why? Why would I do that? Because if you don't, I said, leaning in close, I'll release the recordings of you and Morgan plotting the robbery. I'll send them to the Bar Association. I'll send them to the news. You'll go to prison for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and rape. Julian swallowed hard. He knew I had him checkmated. But if you make the call, I continued, you get to be the victim. You get to keep your license. You just have to testify against Dominic when they find his body. When they find his body? Go, I said, pointing to the exit. Run, Julian. Before I changed my mind. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the phone and ran into the night, leaving his Audi and his dignity behind. I walked through the carnage of the warehouse. 12 men down. The police would find a scene that looked like a rival cartel hit. The ballistics would be confusing, the evidence chaotic. Just the way I liked it. But Dominic was still breathing. I knew where he would go. When a rat is cornered, it runs to its hole. I checked the tracker I had magnetically attached to his SUV days ago. The dot on my screen was moving fast, heading toward the industrial district, back to his stronghold at the shipyard's edge, a fortified office building he owned. He thought he was safe there. He thought he had escaped the ghost. I got back to my truck. I stripped off the heavy plate carrier. I wanted to be lighter, faster. I picked up my phone. I had one more call to make. I dialed Morgan. She answered on the first ring. "Hunter? Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm coming home soon," I said. "But I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Anything." "Pack a bag," I said. "For you and Violet. We're going on a trip tomorrow." "A trip?" "Hunter, are you crazy? We can't leave." "Julian. I heard on the news there's gang violence downtown." She slipped up. She mentioned Julian. "Just pack the bag, Morgan," I said cold-bloodedly. "I'll be there in an hour." "And Morgan?" "Leave the back door unlocked." I hung up. I wasn't going home yet. I was going to finish the job. I drove toward Dominic's stronghold. The final confrontation wouldn't be in the shadows. It would be face to face. The suburban dad was dead. The husband was dead. Only the executioner remained. Dominic's stronghold was an old meatpacking plant converted into a fortress. High fences, barbed wire, and cameras covering every angle. He was inside, terrified, likely surrounded by whatever loyal men he had left. He thought the walls would save him. He didn't know I had the blueprints. I parked a mile away and moved in on foot. The air was cold, biting at my exposed skin, but my blood was running hot. This was the end. The final mile. I didn't bother with the front gate. I went to the drainage outflow pipe that ran beneath the facility. It was filthy, tight, and smelled of rot, but it bypassed the perimeter sensors entirely. I crawled through the sludge, dragging my gear bag behind me. I emerged in the basement boiler room. The hum of the machinery masked my entry. I stripped off my soiled outer layer, revealing the clean tactical gear underneath. I checked my weapon, fresh magazine, round in the chamber. I moved up the stairs. The facility was quiet. Too quiet. Dominic had recalled his men to the inner sanctum, the main office on the top floor. He was turtling. I cleared the first floor. Empty. I cleared the second floor. Empty. On the third floor landing, I found 2 guards. They were jittery, pointing their guns at shadows. I didn't use a gun. I used a distraction. I tossed a spent casing down the hallway. Clink, clink, clink. They both spun toward the sound. I stepped out from the stairwell. Thwip, thwip. 2 precise shots. They dropped before they heard the report. I stepped over their bodies and approached the heavy oak doors of the main office. This was it. The throne room. I didn't kick the door down. I placed a small breaching charge on the lock mechanism. Boom. The door blew inward, splintering off its hinges. Smoke filled the hallway. I walked through the smoke. Dominic was there. He was alone. His last 2 bodyguards had fled or were dead. It didn't matter. He was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, a gold-plated AK-47 in his hands. He looked like a cornered animal. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the grime of the night. He raised the rifle. "Die!" he screamed, pulling the trigger. Click. He stared at the gun in horror. He racked the slide. Click. "You fired your last mag at the warehouse, Dominic," I said, my voice calm, conversational. "You were too scared to count your rounds." He threw the rifle at me. I swatted it aside like a fly. He scrambled backward, knocking over his expensive chair, backing into the corner of the room. "Stay back. I'll pay you. I have money. Millions. In the safe. Take it all." I kept walking toward him. I holstered my pistol. I pulled out the K-bar knife. The blade gleamed in the dim light. "I don't want your money," I said. "What do you want?" he shrieked. "Who sent you? Was it the cartel? Was it the triads?" I stopped 3 feet from him. I pulled off my balaclava. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to know exactly who was sending him to hell. He stared at my face. Confusion clouded his eyes for a moment, and then recognition. "You?" he whispered. "The carpenter. The guy in the alley." "That's right," I said. But you were nobody. You were a sheep. You mistook silence for weakness, Dominic. And you mistook a father's love for vulnerability. He tried to lunge at me, pulling a small knife from his boot. It was a pathetic, desperate move. I caught his wrist midair. I twisted it until the bone snapped. He howled in pain, dropping the knife. I kicked his knee, shattering the joint. He collapsed to the floor, weeping, cradling his broken arm. Please, he begged, looking up at me. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I won't touch your family again. I swear. I know you won't, I said. I grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to the window. It overlooked the city he thought he owned. The lights twinkled below, indifferent to his fate. Look at it, I said. That's the world you poisoned. Please. My daughter, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Violet. Her name is Violet. Say it. Violet, he sobbed. Violet. I'm sorry. She's going to heal, I said. She's going to grow up strong. She's going to forget your face. But you? You're going to be a memory. A cautionary tale. I spun him around and slammed him against the desk. This is for the fathers who couldn't fight back, I said. I didn't make it quick. I made it personal. When it was done, I wiped the blade on his expensive suit. I left him there, slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. I placed a single object on the desk next to his body. It was a betting slip, one of Morgan's old gambling markers I had found in her car. The police would find it. They would connect the dots I wanted them to connect. A gambling debt gone wrong. A gang war. A cleanup. I walked out of the office. I walked down the stairs, past the bodies of his men. I exited the building into the cold night air. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But the job wasn't finished. The monster in the city was dead, but the traitor in my home was still waiting. I got in my truck and drove toward the suburbs. The sun was starting to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. It was a beautiful morning for an eviction. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. It was the silence of a tomb, not a home. The morning sun was just starting to hit the front porch, illuminating the perfectly manicured lawn, a facade of normalcy that hid the rot inside. I didn't use my key. I kicked the front door open. Morgan was in the hallway, suitcases packed, pacing nervously. She jumped when the door slammed against the wall. When she saw me, still wearing my tactical pants, dirt and dried blood on my boots, my face hardened like stone, she froze. Hunter, she whispered. Oh my God. What happened? Are we leaving? I walked past her. I didn't even look at her. I went straight to Violet's room. Violet was sitting on her bed, her backpack ready. She looked scared, but when she saw me, her eyes softened. She saw the change. The operator was fading, and her father was coming back. Is it over? She asked quietly. I nodded. It's over, baby. He's gone. He can never hurt you again. She ran to me and hugged me. I held her tight, feeling the small tremors in her body. This was the only victory that mattered. Not the dead men in the warehouse, not the justice dispensed in that office. Just this. Her safety. Grab your bag, I said gently. Wait in the truck. What about Mom? She asked, looking toward the door. I hesitated. Just wait in the truck, Violet. She understood. She grabbed her bag and walked out, brushing past her mother in the hallway without a word. Violet knew. Kids always know more than you think. When the front door clicked shut, I turned to Morgan. She was trembling. Hunter, what's going on? Where are we going? I reached into my pocket and pulled out her phone, the one I had cloned. I also pulled out a stack of papers, the bank statements, the gambling debts, the chat logs with Julian. I threw them on the floor at her feet. She looked down, and her face crumbled. The mask shattered completely. Hunter, I can explain. I was desperate. Desperate. My voice was low, shaking with the effort to not scream. You sold us out, Morgan. You set up the ambush. You knew they were waiting in that alley. You traded your daughter's innocence for a $50,000 debt. I didn't know they would hurt her, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. Julian said they would just scare you. He promised. You trusted a shark to babysit a lamb, I said. And because of that, our daughter is broken. And I had to become something I swore I'd never be again. I walked to the closet and grabbed a duffel bag I had packed days ago. My clothes. My tools. Hunter, please. Don't leave me. Dominic will kill me if he finds out I didn't pay. I stopped at the door. I looked at her one last time. Dominic is dead, I said coldly. So is his crew. And Julian is currently giving a statement to the police that will implicate you in conspiracy and fraud. You're not going to be killed, Morgan. You're going to prison. Her mouth fell open. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. But before you go to prison, I added, you're going to lose everything else. I transferred the house deed to a trust for Violet this morning. I drained the joint accounts to pay for her therapy. You have nothing. I walked out the door. I didn't look back at the woman wailing on the floor. She was a ghost to me now. I got into the truck. Violet was buckled in, staring straight ahead. Where are we going, Dad? She asked as I backed out of the driveway. North, I said. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere with mountains and lakes. Somewhere we can breathe. We drove for hours. We didn't talk much. We just watched the city fade into the rearview mirror, replaced by highways and trees. 3 weeks later, we found a small cabin in Montana. It needs work. The roof leaks and the porch is rotting, but I can fix it. I'm good at fixing things. Violet is doing better. She started painting again. Yesterday, I heard her laugh for the first time since the alley. It was a small, fragile sound, but it was there. I sat on the porch this morning, drinking coffee, watching the sun come up over the peaks. The P-226 is locked away in the safe again. The operator is dormant, buried deep beneath the layers of sawdust and mountain air. But he's not gone. He's just waiting. I looked at my hands. They were calloused, scarred, but steady. They had taken lives to save one. And as I watched Violet walking through the tall grass, sketching the landscape, I knew I would do it all again. 1,000 times over. Because some demons don't respond to prayers. They only respond to the hunter. The end. Wow, that was heavy. It's hard to carry a secret like that for so long, isn't it? Hunter did what he had to do. So, here is a question for you. If you were in Hunter's shoes, knowing the system failed you, would you have taken justice into your own hands? Or would you have tried one more time to trust the law? I really want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below. And hey, I see you guys watching from all over the world. Drop a comment and tell me which city or country you're tuning in from. It's amazing to see our community grow. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me bring you more content. Also, tell me, what kind of story do you want next? More military revenge? A detective mystery? Or maybe something supernatural? Let me know what you crave, and I'll write it for you. Until the next thriller, stay safe and watch your back.